You can you can
Not
take it
let it
out if you
ride.
need to. Yeah,
Let it
I've
ride.
never had it. I haven't had it yet, man. So Danny, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, Dom. Excited, man.
So let's start off with the most important question. What's your current brewing method?
Oh, well, that depends. So, uh, first thing in the morning, my wife drinks quite a bit of coffee also. So we just do, it's actually just like a standard drip coffee pot, man. But then in the afternoon, I always do something different. So I have like 1 cup of coffee right after lunch. And so that I'll do, I really like the AeroPress. That's like my favorite way to go. But sometimes pour over, every now and then French press. We got an espresso machine down here at the warehouse. So if I'm here, maybe I'll rip that thing. So just kind of varies.
Variety is the spice of life and spice
Oh,
of
dude, you
coffee.
got it. Yeah.
What I'd like to jump into to begin with is your background in training, how that kind of set you up for entrepreneurialism. So let's jump off with, I believe you got into wrestling and you were a wrestler as a young man, right?
Yeah, so I got into wrestling in high school. Prior to that, my parents, I mean, they really were big on kind of exposing to a lot of different things. My mom loved sports, and so we were in soccer, baseball, all these things kind of as a kid. And in the meantime, also my dad, he likes that stuff, but he's really into outdoors, and so we were going off on these week-long backpacking trips, and lots of camping and that type of stuff also. So that was kind of all through my childhood. And then in high school, played soccer, wrestled, and then for track, like through shot put, did some pole vaulting, discus, that type of stuff, and track and field. So that was a lot of fun. But wrestling was where I kind of excelled, where I had the most success through kind of those years.
What did you learn through wrestling? Like what kind of strategies that you take into today?
Sure. Well, so I coached wrestling for 10 years after I got done competing. And one thing that really stood out to me that I noticed that the people that had success had this one thing in common, is that once you realize that there are times where you need to do something and it like physically hurts you, right? Right. But if you do it, you're going to win. And if you don't do it, like you either definitely will lose or you may not win, whatever, right? And so I always thought that was really interesting. That's something that's unique to wrestling compared to a lot of other sports. I mean, maybe you're running and it hurt, like say you're running whatever, the 2 mile, like yeah, you get some lung burn, your body kind of hurts a little bit at the end. You have to push even though it hurts. That's one kind. And then in wrestling, it's different though, because sometimes you're going to shoot on this double leg or a blast double or something, like you're going to put your face right in this person's chest, like you're going to slam your nose into this person's breastbone as hard as you can, right? And so it's a little harder to get yourself to do that type of stuff sometimes. But there's that message over and over again. It's like wrestling's one of those sports where you can, to a certain degree, you can just outwork the other person, right? If you have the better the technique, obviously that's better, but if you're good enough at most things, you can just kind of grind somebody down. And if you're willing to hurt more, then that's you got pretty good odds of winning.
Yeah, it reminds me of my jiu-jitsu days where I got my blue belt very quickly, but it wasn't because I was any good. It's because I was way fitter and was better suffering than most of the other people there.
Dude, that's it, man. Like that better suffering is definitely a real thing,
Yeah. How does that apply to what you're doing now? Like, how do you see that in your choices in day-to-day life?
Well, I mean, something is like a relatively simple thing is, I mean, like I get up pretty early, and that's not always fun. And it's not crazy, but I get up at like 4:45, and I do that because during that time between when I get up and when basically my kids get up, so like that kind of 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. time, like that's the most productive time of the day. Like I'll get more things done during that time, or the most important things done for the entire day during that time. There's no distractions, nobody's texting you, no one's expecting a phone call from you, no one's scheduling anything, right? You really just do kind of have this time where it's quiet, and you're awake, probably the most creative you're going to be all day, first thing in the morning like that. And so you can just really get into stuff and get it done. And that's one of those things that a lot of people don't necessarily like doing, even if you're a morning person. Like I'm definitely a morning person. I like the mornings. but that 4:45 alarm isn't always agreeable, especially if, you know, getting to bed late the night before for whatever reason, or, if the kids are getting you up in the middle of the night, and you end up being up for a certain period of time. But, it's one of those things where like the alarm goes off, you got stuff to do. It's like, all right, well, just, get up and get the work done. And the easy thing would be to hit snooze or to reset your alarm for later. But that's not going to lead you down the path of success,
So it's that idea of success that's driving you to do that.
Yeah, man, I don't know. Yeah, for sure. The drive for success, the drive to, I just I hate playing from behind. I don't like the idea of other people waiting on me to get things done. Like, I don't want to be a roadblock, or a log jam for anybody else to do their job or for any projects to move forward, And so that kind of time in the morning is a great time to get in there and make sure that everything that I need to be doing, that I'm taking care of.
I'm sure it's changed over the years, but what does success look like to you now?
Well, that's a hard question, because there's success in so many different parts of life, right? You say, like, what does business success look like? What does personal success look like? What do, but for me, myself right now, if I were to try and, I'd have to put all those things together, right? Like, it's not just like a single word. Like, and to me, success is the ability to kind of do, I guess, work. Let me see it. I want to kind of be a little more succinct with this, but to me, success is the ability to be at home or spend the time with my family that I need to, while still moving everything else in my life forward, right? And so it's easy to give up in one area, or just to give up like space in one area in order to do other things. So example of that is if my businesses were all growing and thriving, but I'm gone all the time, like I'm never home for dinner, I'm missing all my kids' like little school activities, or missing their soccer games on the weekends, then is that really success? Am I really experiencing success in that point? Like, I don't think so. I think that I would know that I'm be falling short in some areas of my life that are important. In the same hand, if I, was at home all the time and spent, and didn't take care of the things that I need to for work, and that my businesses were struggling, then I don't think I feel successful in that regard either, right? I guess the third component of that is health, like physical health. If I felt like I was having a good relationship with the kids, and things at work were moving forward, but if I, wasn't exercising, if I was tired all the time, if I, whatever, so having different health issues, and I don't feel like I'd be successful either, right? So it's kind of those three components that I think you have to really pay attention to all of them, or does success in one of those three areas really count as success if everything else is falling apart? And like, I don't think it does,
Yeah, I'd probably add one element to that as well: personal happiness, because you can have the kind of, like, on the surface there's the business success, on the surface there's the family success, on the surface there's physical success. You might be jacked, but like, are you happy doing all of those things?
Well, I think that's kind of, I can see that. I think that maybe personal happiness is the umbrella over these three buckets, right? Like, I think that if you're doing the things you need to be doing, there's like three buckets, and then personal happiness is probably going to take care of itself, right? Like, these are the things, right? Like, these are the things that add up to a personal happiness, because I think that if you're falling short in one of these three categories, then you're not going to have that happiness, right? That personal happiness. Whereas if you're, doing a good job of kind of managing these three areas, you probably will, right? And maybe mention like physical health, maybe instead of we just say health, right? Because then it takes into kind of the physical and the mental side of things, and kind of pulls them all together there. But yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people, it seems like a lot of times if somebody just isn't happy for whatever reason, it's obviously something in their life isn't going the way they want it to. And a lot of times you'll be able to trace it back to kind of one of those three categories.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on this show, because there are multiple avenues that I can see, at least from a few thousand miles away through social media accounts, that you seem to kind of hit roughly the definition that I would define as success. And a lot of athletes, especially, or a lot of coaches who listen to the show will think, okay, I've got to go all in on one of them. And that by necessity means that I've got to let the other ones slide. There's
Right.
obviously times, right, when you have to focus on one
Sure.
thing, and like there's a
Sure.
balancing act. But like, how do you keep that balance in check?
Yeah, well, one thing you mentioned now, like sometimes, there's some things have to slide or you're focusing, and I think the biggest part about that is just being aware of when it's going to happen, and when that happens, it's happening on purpose, not on accident, right? Like if you're slacking in one area because you're, overwhelmed in another area, if that happens on accident, that's going to really be an issue. If you know that's coming and you're kind of prepared for that, then it's not as big of a problem. Um, for example, a couple of years ago, so after wrestling, I got into CrossFit a little bit, and that led me to Olympic weightlifting, and then I competed in Olympic style weightlifting for 5 or 6 years at a relatively high level, and then I stopped, and then a couple of years ago, someone's like, "Hey, you should do this. You're 35 now. You should do this masters weightlifting meet," and anyway, kind of talked me into doing it. And so I knew it was 20 weeks away. I knew there was going to be like 20 weeks where all of a sudden my personal health and my physical, training was going to definitely require more of me than what it had been, right? So I knew that was coming. And so I just talked to my wife ahead of time, said, "Hey, like, we know it's happening. So for these next like 20 weeks, like it's missing, like not missing work be an option, right? Like if this is, I have to make sure to get in these training sessions leading up to this thing." And then kind of same thing, like at work, everyone knew what was going on. They knew I had this thing that I was training for that was, and so, everyone was kind of on the same page, and then you kind of work through the things that lead to that. Also on that same note, sometimes, okay, at work, for example, we had like one of our main marketing associates quit, which is fine. And so that then I'm like, all right, well, that means that until we replace that position, I know that I'm going to have a little more on my plate here doing this type of thing. And same thing, I had the conversation with my wife, said, "Hey, like this is going on at work. So for the next, 2 to 3 weeks, I'm going to be a little more like busy, a little more stressed out, probably from work type stuff. So just like give you a heads up on that." And then I also knew like, okay, that also means I'm probably going to, I might spend a little less time, at the gym, right? These types of things. And so aware that that's going to happen and planning for that is one thing. When it slips on accident, that's another. And so that actually gets to your question. So how do I balance those things? Is I'm a big advocate of something that my business coach Craig Ballantyne he teaches, and which is you can plan. He has one book called The Perfect Day Formula, where you can kind of like plan out your days. And so if you have like a schedule set for the days, and things don't happen on accident, right? You have things scheduled and planned and all that. And then also he has a week plan. It's like the Perfect Week Formula. That's what that one's called. And I think that that's really important as well. So when I go through and look at my weeks, is the first thing that goes into your calendar are personal things, as far as like family and whatever you want to call like self-care, workouts, whatever. And you put those in your calendar first. So for example, I know, okay, if I have to, my wife's gonna be working, whatever, if I have to take the kids to school on these 2 days, then like that goes in the calendar before anything else does, right? We eat dinner together as a family at like 5:15, like pretty early. It's like, boom, that's in the calendar. I plan, I will be home at that time, like every day. So those things going first. Okay, I know that I need to go to the gym at least these like 3 days. And so boom, so those go in the calendar, right? Then once those things are in, then you sit there and now you have that blueprint, and then the everything else. So, work specifically then goes in the calendar around that. So you can look at this at the beginning of the week, and like if all those main things are in there, and then you fill in work to fill those gaps. And most people when they're under problems, they're doing the opposite of work, right? Like they have their stuff for work and this, and that, and other thing. And those are the main priorities. And then they're like, "Oh, I didn't have time to go to the gym because I was busy working." It's like, well, if the gym would have been a non-negotiable in your calendar, then you would have worked around that. Maybe that means you get up an hour earlier and get some stuff done in the morning. Maybe it means you stay up an hour later, right? But the thing is that, you got to put in those main rocks to make sure that you're taking care of your personal life, your personal health, your family, like those important things first. and then work fills in, the space between those. And that's a big part of why I do get up early, right? Is I know that if I bank, 1 to 2 hours of work before 7 a.m., then that allows me to make sure I am home at 5:15 for dinner every night with the family, and so different things like that kind of work around.
How long does that weekly planning process take you?
At this point, I don't do it every week anymore because I have my weekly schedules
Yeah.
pretty set, pretty much the same. But I did it every week for 6 months or so, just to kind of make sure. And I mean, it's a 30-minute thing, right? Like, and so if you want to get into the whole system, what you could do is the best way to do it is you actually at the beginning of the week. So on, say, Sunday is a good planning day. Sunday, you take an hour on Sunday morning and you say, what are the most important tasks I need to get done this week? Or what do I know I need to do? And you just do like a brain dump of every task that is coming up. Now things might pop up you don't know are coming up. That's okay. And so you put these tasks down and then you put them in order. Then you actually order them from the one most important thing down to 20. And then you look at your calendar. And once you have your kind of personal rocks in place, those non-negotiables in place, then you just go down that task list and say, okay, what's the number one most important thing I need to do this week? And then boom, schedule it in. And it's the idea of being a scheduler instead of a lister, right? And so and then, all right, after number one, so I know that I'm gonna do that Monday at 9:30. Okay, what's the second most important thing? Okay, that's boom. And then where's the ideal spot for that to go in? And you can actually plug in that whole list of tasks into a calendar, and then like this whole list of shit I need to get done this week is all scheduled to happen at some point over the next 5 days. Then as you go through your week, you don't have these periods of like, oh, what are we now? Or feeling like you're spinning or whatever, right? It's like, you have these things, they're all done, they're all on the schedule. You already have the plan. Now you just follow the plan. Now you just go down your schedule, and as things come up, you get them done.
It's funny because 30 minutes, sometimes I think when you start or before you start doing something like this, it's like, oh shit, man, 30 minutes. It's like, do I have 30 minutes on a Sunday? Like, can I make the time? But it's 30 minutes that creates how many hours are in the rest of the week.
Oh my God.
5
Yeah,
times
dude.
more productive. And secondly, it creates about 40 more 30-minute slots throughout the week.
Oh, yeah, dude, there's no question. Some of those things, like, this is because it's so easy, man. There's like this idea of, again, Craig talks about it, but like perverse procrastination, right? Like, you can open your email inbox and like think that you're working for hours. Like, you can be in your inbox all day, but like, how much are you really getting done? Like, how productive are you actually? How much that time do you really need to be spending in there, right? And so, this is one great way to kind of make sure that the most important things, the things you want to get done, actually get done because they're actually in the calendar. And then the funny thing is, all those other tasks, as far as like, clearing out or working throughout your email inbox, or, different calls and things that come up, they all seem to get done. They all seem to find a spot, right? Whereas they might, if you didn't plan those important tasks, those other things will end up kind of filling in that time that you need to be doing the more important things. There's this thing, you got to do. Maybe it's like write up this contract or something. And it's important and it's good and all that, but it's like not an exciting thing to do. And so it's like, well, yeah, man, I should probably check my inbox again. Let me make sure I'm not like missing anything, right? It's like you can kind of do that all day long and put off on writing that contract for at least 3 or 4 days, maybe even 3 or 4 weeks, just because I got some other stuff to do.
Yeah, you become highly efficient at very minor activities as opposed to highly effective at the major activities. And
Yeah,
like
exactly.
athletes do this the whole time too, man. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you see it the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What do people like doing, right? So a lot of times people bias whatever they say, it's training, athletics, you bias your training towards the things you like, or you convince yourself that something's really important because you like to do it, right? Like, I'd say oftentimes you'll find someone who has more of a strength background, and they're going into like a CrossFit training or something. They're like, oh man, got to make sure you have this like pillar of strength training, and then everything else kind of goes around that. And maybe like the longer duration workouts probably get the least amount of attention because they don't want to do it. They like that activity the least, and so they always want to focus on their strength. You just convince yourself that's the most important thing. I think
Yeah.
that's the other way too. Someone comes from like a running background, they're going to really probably do a lot of like longer, less intense workouts, because they're convinced, or they're convincing themselves that's more important, you know? And so yeah, people, you will always tend to bias towards your strengths or things you like. And so having things kind of, you know, scheduled and listed and that type of stuff is one way to avoid just playing into your strengths and actually, you know, being more productive.
So one thing you need in order to do that is, whether it's a formalized or otherwise hierarchy of values. It's like, these are the things that are most important to me in this order. And for you, obviously, that's family. It's like, okay, those are the things that are going in the first. It's mealtime, picking kids up, or whatever those kind of jobs are. Then it's your physical health, and then it's business, and I'm sure other things go in there as well. And if athletes haven't done that, if athletes haven't gone, okay, this is my most important, like, maybe it is training at the moment, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's sorting your job out. Maybe it's this other relationship thing that needs to go.
Yeah.
And like, if you haven't done that, then you're just flying blind.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's a big part of it. And also there's the understanding, right? There's the self-awareness of things. And yeah, and personal health also, like you can get to that from so many different angles, you know, like people have, you know, maybe don't have time, or again, that term, don't have time, but maybe it's not a priority for you to be in the gym, you know, for an hour 5 days a week. Well, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you don't like do it at all or any focus on it. Doesn't mean you still can't like maintain or make some small gains in other ways. Like, okay, well, if you know that's the situation, like I could go to the gym more, you know, but I'm choosing to not go during those early morning hours because I'm working during those early morning hours, right? But what is that? But then that doesn't mean that I just like that day is a total loss, right? Just like make sure that your nutrition's kind of squared away. Um, you know, at lunch, when I go eat my lunch, like I'll go like stand out in the sun while I eat lunch, and I'll go for a little 10-minute walk, right? Like you take these spots throughout the day to still make sure that you're taking care of yourself. It doesn't mean you have to, you know, just completely blow it off because it's you don't feel like you have the time for it.
Yeah, there's a book that our athletes always are kind of a bit miffed about reading when I suggest it to them, Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And
Sure.
in that, he talks about like, there's no such thing as priorities. There's your priority, and that's it. And it's like, okay, what is the one most important thing? And when you are more, um, when you are easily able to identify what that thing is, it clarifies everything else.
Well, it tells you not only what to do, but it tells you what not to do, right?
Yeah,
It
which is
allows
way
you
more
what,
important.
yeah, it tells you what you can ignore, you know?
Yeah, exactly right. What are your like go to daily self care activities, or regular self
Um,
care, maybe not daily?
Yeah, I mean, for one, is I mentioned nutrition earlier, man. I think that when people talk about self care a lot, they don't really talk about like diet as much as nutrition. But man, that's the most important thing. Like if you're eating, you can feel it. Like if you're eating well, you know you're eating the way you should be, right? Whether that's quantity or quality or whatever you're into. You can definitely tell a difference than if you're just eating kind of whatever you want and eating foods that you know are gonna either make you tired or whatever, right? So that's something that's actually really important to me is making sure that I'm kind of eating the right things and doing my best, you know, for that. That's really important. Another thing for self-care, it's kind of funny. It's like maybe people wouldn't always categorize as that, but you know, it is kind of that making sure that you have like some time with like your family, if that's a part of your life or something like that, or social, right? I guess would be one way to put that too. um, because there's none of those things. Like if you're not, like you're gonna at the end of the day, you're gonna all of a sudden you're gonna feel tired, you're gonna feel like disappointed in yourself, and then that type of stuff. So those are kind of like two like relatively non-traditional self-care things that I think are important. um, and then another one is for myself, I don't do like daily meditation necessarily, but I do some sort of breathing drills every day. And so um, whether that's like a box breathing or just like a in for, you know, whatever, 10 seconds, out for 10 seconds for a period of time. And a lot of times I'll even do that like while walking my dog. Like I'll take my dog on a walk in the morning, and on the morning walk, it's like, okay, like only nasal breathing, and I'll do like some breathing drills while I'm on that. And while doing that really just helps me. Like I don't take my AirPods and listen to music or podcasts necessarily on that walk. I use that time just kind of go for a walk and do some breathing drills. So it kind of turns into a little bit of a like a moving meditation in that regards.
James Clear will be proud of you, man. Like that habit stacking.
Yeah, dude, for sure. So those are some things that I think are good, that I think are really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess
When
those are probably the main ones.
Cool, sweet. Yeah, there's some interesting stuff showing links between nervous system regulation and the food you take on, like basically
Mm-hmm.
carbohydrate, sugars linking towards that sympathetic fight or flight response, and then
Sure,
fats
absolutely.
and protein like linking into that parasympathetic rest and digest, which is why when you have a massive steak you just want to crash.
Mm.
So it's like, yeah, like you can prime your physical aspect of your nervous system through your nutrition, which is really cool. I noticed in that journey to your masters competition, or your, what was it, the world masters?
Yeah, Masters World Cup, right?
Masters World Cup. You mentioned visualization tongue in cheek. Is that something that is a habit for you in weightlifting, or is it something that you worked on, or is it something that it was just a tongue in cheek reference?
Oh, I do more or less at different times. When I was training and weightlifting, I would do a lot more visualization. I
Mhm.
wouldn't necessarily do it like every rep in training, but I would, from time to time, if I knew there's something that that I was really trying to work on or something I was struggling with, I would. Even now, I do occasionally, like just working out, whatever. If it's a heavy day, and I'm like going for something that I know is going to be tough, I know it's going to be challenging, I'll visualize myself making it 2 or 3 times before doing the attempt. So I do that now, just training wise, because I know it helps. Something with visualization that really to me is weightlifter Morgan King. She's a 2016 Olympian from the U.S. here, and she's a friend of mine. She was a Caffeine Kilos sponsored athlete, and we were she was doing this weightlifting meet in Florida, and I was coaching her like in the back room. I was like doing her attempts for her and helping her out in the meet. And she asked me one time, like between her warm up attempts, it's like, hey, on the platform, are they using spring clips or competition like collars? And I was like, oh, that's a good question. Like, let me check. And then I said, yeah, she's like spring clamps. He said, okay. And that was it. I didn't ask why, whatever, because she's like warming up, getting ready for this thing. And then afterwards, she brought it up. She said, hey, remember when I asked that? I said, yeah. Like, what's up with that? I said, well, because before every single attempt, and the warm-ups included, she, the warm-up bars are just like regular barbells, black bumper plates. They're not always like the competition style plates. So she would visualize herself making the lift, but she would visualize the bar like it was going to be on the platform. And so even during her warm-ups, she would, prior to every single lift, she would visualize 2 or 3 times her lifting, her taking the bar, but the weight loaded like it is on a competition bar. So in that way, when she went out on the platform for her first attempt, the bar is loaded, and it's loaded the way that she had visualized it, while she was in back. And so if there's spring clips, or if competition collars weigh 2.5 kilos, and so the bar would be loaded differently if it was the competition collars or the spring clamps. And so I was like, man, that's pretty good. Like, it's like another level of this visualization, right? Like not just seeing yourself doing it exactly in there, but actually like visualizing the bar loaded the exact way. So when you go out there, it's as close as you can to replicating what you were seeing in your head, And she said, yeah, in training, she visualizes every single attempt at least once before she makes them.
That's pretty sweet. That's
Yeah,
the key thing about visualization. It's like the detail carries.
the
And
details, right? Yeah,
if you feel like, if there's a part of your brain that feels like, oh, I've been here before, you might as well have been there before, and it puts that at ease, that kind of fear of, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here, do I belong here? It turns
yeah.
that down a little bit. When you are visualizing, I'm a bit of a nerd for this stuff.
Oh yeah.
So when you're visualizing, are you first person or are you third person?
Oh, first person.
Yeah. and
Mm-hmm.
and like, are you visualizing the walk up to the lift? Are you kind of,
Yeah.
is it
Well,
sensation, is it like
yeah.
the thoughts
So
will go?
sure. So for me, a lot of times it's sensation. So I think especially in weightlifting specifically, like that's really what's important, right? It's like as you're doing the lift, yeah, it's the sensation. I want to like see the things that I'm going to see, and then I want to feel the things that I want to feel, right? It's like, what's the bar going to feel at? It's just below the knees. What's going to feel like as I finish the pull, whatever, right? And so, yeah, so it's funny, I guess the term is visualization, but when I really think about it, more than visualizing, it's like a sensation experience for myself.
Yeah. When we, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, carry on. Go ahead.
Yeah, when we work with athletes, what we talk about is walking into your imagination theater. And it's like, okay, you're walking in, you're going down, you're descending down those stairs almost, and you can feel that. And it's that, again, it's the detail that carries, because yeah, we're highly visual creatures, but it's not all the picture. And so it's like, can you get some sounds in there? Can you get this physical sensation, even if there's smells that like
Do
people
you
go that?
encourage people? Do you encourage people to visualize in first person or like in third person?
First person typically. That's where they're at. We
Yeah.
can it kind of initially, it's a one size fits one solution. We typically go for like first person, but there's people
Yeah.
who just like, I can't get that, man. Like, and I feel better to go the other way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, okay, fine. Then watch yourself do it. That was something that Morgan said too, is that she said that occasionally in training that she would not be able to see herself make a lift. And then what she does, if she can't make it, if she misses in her visualization, then she thinks of someone else on the team. And at this time, she was training at the Olympic Training Center. She's like, someone else that's at the OTC with me that I think has the best technique on the team. I visualize them making that weight that I missed in my visualization.
Nice.
And because then just like seeing somebody make it gives you a little more confidence, even if you feel like you missed it yourself, right? That was an interesting. So that was one instance where she would go third person, is because if she couldn't do it in first person, then she would watch somebody else visualize someone else making it. Something else I've used visualization for. I love this topic, by the way. This is interesting to me too. And like the descending down the staircase is interesting. Is I read this book by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and it's called How to Change the Habit of Being Yourself. And the whole premise is that everybody has something that you don't like that you do out of habit. Maybe it's procrastinating on something. Maybe it's hitting the snooze in the morning, right? Maybe it's something totally different. Maybe it's, like skipping your warm up at the gym. I mean, maybe it's something like maybe it's something like whatever, like a pornography addiction or whatever, right? Just like everyone has something about themselves they're not, they don't like that they do, right? And so the whole thing is you start by meditating, and there's different ways to do that, to get into like you said, like going down the stairs and do whatever, right? So he wants to get into he wants to start meditating, but not just meditate, but also do this induction, right? So where you kind of get into your parasympathetic nervous system a little bit and calm down. And during his induction techniques, there's a few different ones, like going down a stairway is like kind of one of them. And then once you're in that kind of quasi subconscious area, then what you do is whatever the trigger is that starts the behavior you don't like, is you visualize like that trigger happening. And then when you start to do the behavior that you always tend to do when that happens, is you just say to yourself, you say stop, right? And then you stop that before you even begin the behavior. And you go through this, a handful of times before ending the meditation, before ending the visualization. And it's so interesting because it totally works. And the reason why, or for why I seem like it works for me, is, in real life, you don't get this many like reps, like these practice reps. And when you do, there's the actual stimulus going on, and convincing yourself to stop in the middle of this habit you're doing is really hard, because it's a habit. You're just doing it. You're already into the activity before you like realize that you're doing this thing you didn't want to do, but if you can visualize, you can get all these reps in. You can have success stopping yourself from doing the thing. You do that 5 times. You do that for a week in a row, 5 days in a row. You just 25 times. You did 25 reps of doing it. And so I actually did this one time, and I had the experience where the trigger happened, and I started to do the thing, and then I was like, I heard this voice in my head that said stop. And I was like, oh shit. And then I did. Like, it was just like, I was aware that this thing was bad. And actually mine was funny. It was like checking my phone too much. Like just like looking at my phone, like, and whatever, and like going and scrolling Instagram for no reason. Like that was the whole thing. I'm like, okay, so what happens? Like, oh, something's going on. I just like catch like grabbing my phone. And like, so then I was like, all right. So every time I go to grab my phone and like flip it over to open Instagram, whatever. And anyway, so I just like visualize myself starting to do it. And then as soon as I would grab my phone, I would say stop. Boom. A week later, I'm just like sitting there in the morning when I was supposed to be working, and I'm on the computer, and all of a sudden I grab my phone and I hear this voice like stop. I was like, oh shit, it worked. I put my phone down and moved on, you know. So yeah, so using visualization not just as like an immediately prior to activity or like a leading to training, you can also use it to kind of rewire your brain a little bit and get yourself into or out of habits that you do or don't want to do.
Yeah, that's sweet. Like there's so much that I just wanted to jump in all over what you're saying then, because I was just so stoked by what you're saying. There's like there's the practice, there's the myelination that's happening. There's like you may as well be doing it, and you're insulating those pathways and making them more likely to fire again. And then the other thing that's sweet is that instead of just trying to change behavior, instead of trying to intervene the whole time, you're focusing on interruption, which is that you're going through these like systems just like dominoes are falling. And instead of trying to reroute the dominoes and keep them kind of going to another direction, all you're doing is putting your hand in front of them and you're saying stop. Yeah. And that's the power. You just need to interrupt, and instead of trying to intervene the whole time.
Yeah, but the first step before doing that is awareness, right? You have to be aware that you're headed. And you have to be aware before you get too far down the path, right? Because once you've gone past a certain point, it's like, oh, now it's just happening. Like now the dopamine response of what you're doing is going to be is going to override your will. Obviously, that's why it's a habit, right? And so you have to like kind of have that one, like either not rely on your willpower and kind of have this subconscious level of being able to stop it, or just the awareness of stopping it and using your willpower to stop before it gets to the point of kind of no return.
Yeah. What I find fascinating about this is the more I kind of play with things like that in my own life, I noticed that, yes, there's a physical behavioral trigger, like going to check my phone is a classic, but there's the emotional trigger before that, and there's the thoughts before that. And it's like when you start catching those things that are kind of earlier on in that pathway, you're like, oh, okay, now I've got more control, because you've like even less momentum has built up and even less kind of power behind it has built up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice, man. What else is you've done habits? We've done actually. Let's. I always like throwing this question in. What's the biggest struggle you've had to face in the last 5 years?
Oh man, struggle in the last 5 years. So I don't know what maybe like the one biggest struggle in the last 5 years is, but I'll say that was one thing about business specifically that's interesting is. You know, I have a gym, and then I have Caffeine and Kilos as well. And in the gym, I have these two business partners, and in Caffeine and Kilos, I had two business partners. And at the gym, the two guys, they both kind of decided they wanted out. Okay, and that's fine, no problem, great. Like, do what if you want to be here, it's all good. And so there's like some ownership changes there. And then 6 months later, I'd like just got out of the woods on that. Like, okay, everything's squared away, got it all worked out, everything's good to go. And then boom, Caffeine and Kilos, one of the guys decided that he wanted out of that company as well, which is fine. Again, that's great. Whatever you want to do, it's fine. But it was like, man, it was like this for a year, basically. I was dealing with, you know, like buyouts and old partners and new partners and like what's going on here and there. And I know this isn't like some crazy extreme, you know, like the grand scheme of things, the grand scheme of life, these are relatively minor. But when they're happening and everything's kind of going down, you're dealing with it. It's like, just anyway, but that was an interesting time because it was like one thing after another, right? Like I had the conversation with my wife of, hey, like I'm going to be next couple months are going to be like, I'm going to have a lot going on at work. And so just give me a little bit of grace, you know, with that. And I'm going to do my best. This isn't like me being able to shirk off all responsibilities, but just, you know, be aware if I seem kind of stressed out, like it's not you, it's stuff with the family, that's what's going on. And then I just get past that, like, all right, cool, in the clear. And then, yeah, like a month later, like, boom, same thing, except for on you know, a business with 10 times the size, it's going to be kind of 10 times more intense with that, right? So anyways, those happening back to back was a challenge for sure, something that was difficult to kind of like keep your head in the game and stay with it and not get discouraged and that type of stuff.
So when I experience things like that, and I know when pretty much everyone else I know experiences that, they have like a tendency to fall into a pattern of thinking. Mine is from ages ago when it's like, oh man, why is this happening to me? It's like that victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything that you had to watch out for? Was there anything like patterns of thinking you're like, oh man, like I'm going to fall back into this if I'm not careful, or that you saw yourself fall into?
I'm pretty good with that. I don't think that I'm pretty good about not like feeling like a victim or that type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. For me, it's kind of more of when that type of thing happens, it's just like, um, it's not necessarily that. It's more of like a dread, a little bit of like, oh man, I know that this is going to be a lot to fucking deal with, and this is going to be a lot of time. And like, what about the others? Like, I got all this other stuff I got to do now. I got to deal with this also, right? Like, kind of one more thing on the plate. And that's kind of how what starts happening with me more. So I'm like, okay, well, all right, well, that's, you know, I guess that means for the next whatever period of time that this is going to completely change everything I've going on, and what else, whatever. But what then I kind of realized, or what I'm getting better at realizing, is when these types of things happen, and the more they happen, usually the more you kind of take them in stride. It's just like, okay, well, that's this is what's going on. This is what's going on, right? Like it's in the end, I know it's going to be fine, right? It's kind of the idea of like, all these things aren't necessarily good or bad. They just kind of are. And then, and sometimes something that you think is bad ends up being good, right? And that goes the other way as well. So anyway, I don't have the victim thing as much, but I do definitely have like a overwhelming. I get more of like an overwhelming response to it.
What's cool there is, and by the way, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's like sometimes people will see anyone in kind of any position that they look up to and go, oh, they probably don't experience that overwhelm, or they don't experience that kind of
Dude,
like, oh shit moment. But yeah,
every,
it's there.
everyone is just people, man. It's funny. I'm talking to like people who run companies that are 10 times bigger than mine, 100 times bigger than any of my companies, and it's always refreshing to hear them say things like, oh yeah, dude, like we're just kind of making this up as we go too. Like there's
We're winging it too.
it's like, that's the whole thing. It's like you try stuff, and if it works, you do more of it. If it doesn't, you do something else, right? And so, but especially in business, you get that when you're early on, in particular, whereas you're like, oh man, like I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know how am I gonna grow this thing? I just don't know, whatever. And you think that, these other companies, everyone's got this all figured out, and they know exactly what they're doing, and it works every time. And there's, they have this blueprint to whatever. And then you talk to them, and they're like, nah, dude. Like, yeah, they have a blueprint. It's like you come up with ideas and you try them.
Yeah.
That's the blueprint. And it's like, if it doesn't work, stop. It does, do more. But it's that there's not necessarily like this, like if A then B thing. It's like, no, you try A and then you see what B is, and then you go from there.
Yeah, especially when all you see from other businesses is their marketing, which is perfectly designed to look in control and intentional. And it's like, yeah, we do that too. And it's like, behind the surface, there's a lot more. Oh shit, what are we going to do here? And how's this working? And I think that's even against for athletes. Like you look through Instagram and see everyone who's got their shit together, but apparently not when you actually speak to them.
Yeah, and the thing is too, it's like you talk about like companies, especially with their marketing, whatever. It's like, well, yeah, but those are things that either one, they've tried and worked, and so they're doing more of it, or they're trying and isn't working. It's easy to like see something like, oh, they must be working because I saw it. It's like, well, yeah, how many times have you seen it, right? If you see something from a company, you only see it once, the odds are it probably didn't go that well. Now you see the same ad, say you're on whatever TikTok, and that you see the same ad from a company for months. It's like, oh, that means that one is definitely working, right? Because there's no way they'd be still doing it if it wasn't, if they weren't getting a return on it, Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is true. Everyone thinks that everyone else has everything, buttoned up and all that. The truth is everyone's kind of working through it, man.
What I love about your piece on going through this kind of more challenging times is that it comes back to putting those reps in before. Like you've already put the reps in of like getting up early, of doing things that you don't want to do, of like making sure you stick to a decent nutrition plan, all these kind of things. And like you've either got incidental hardship, which is shit happening to you, which you didn't choose to happen, or you've got intentional hardship. And it's like, okay, sweet, I've got some intentional hardship that I'm going after day after day after day after day, which leads you towards your goal. If you do that enough, then the incidental hardship doesn't stop happening, but
right,
it's easier to deal with, or at least less awful to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's for sure a big part of it. I think that, that's what a lot of people say, man, like going to the gym, and like, I know I've mentioned CrossFit a few times, but like, we hear that from people all the time when they start for the first time, like doing CrossFit or like working out in that way they haven't before. Is they go, yeah, man, turns out well, part of the reason I love coming here is like it's the hardest part of my day. Like 9 out of 10 times, the hardest part of my day was like finishing this workout that I didn't want to do, or like going, the type of deal. I pushed myself harder in these 10 minutes than like I'm going to do all day. Like that's done. Everything else can be easy now, right? Like nothing else can have that same intensity. And then when it does happen, when you are in a situation where you going hard and you kind of like want to just quit or just like stop, it's like you don't, because that's not a habit. You're establishing a habit of finishing things even when you don't want to, right? And that's an entirely different situation than establishing a habit of quitting when things get hard.
Exactly, man. Exactly, man. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Before we do, there's a couple of questions. Actually, one I've already asked you about daily habits, but there's one that I'd like to get from. What's the book that you've gifted most often to other people?
Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Nice. What is it about that book?
Man, it should be required reading. So people ask me quite a bit, like, what's the, like, oh, I'm going to start reading more, whatever, self-improvement books, what should I start with? Or even just people say like, well, any suggestions? That's like always the go-to, because the information in it is so important. And I think that if you have not read or at least understand the concepts in mindset, then every other thing you do, you will not get as much out of, right? Like it is like the amplifier for everything else, because the basic, just real briefly, the premise is that, everything's a learned skill, and that, the growth mindset and believing that you can improve on things, versus fixed mindset, believing that you can't improve, or your current skill level is just what it's going to be. That's like a oversimplification, but that's the kind of the gist. And so if you understand that and believe that, then every other piece of education or improvement that you try to do, you'll get more out of, because you'll believe that you can change and can improve. If you don't fully embrace those ideas, then, you're trying something, it's easy to read something than like, oh, well, that would maybe work for somebody else, that would never work for me. And that defeats mindset. You're not gonna have any success that way. So you got to read Mindset by Carol Dweck, because it will, even if right now you don't believe that's true necessarily, like read the book, maybe and then decide for yourself, right?
Yeah. The worst that happens is almost negligible, and the best that happens is your whole life changes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, the best that happens is that, yeah, every single other thing you do for the rest of your life is impacted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The worst that happens is like you read 300 pages.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably not even that long.
Exactly. And then finally, where can people find out more about you and all your other ventures?
Yeah, see, DannyLehr.com, Lehr is how you spell Lehr. That has everything linked to it on there. But Caffeine and Kilos is great, man. We got killer coffee. That's official coffee of USA Weightlifting. That was great coffee. The apparel's cool. I'm actually really proud of everything that we do over at Caffeine and Kilos. So make sure to check that out too.
Personal question: do you guys ship to the UK?
Yep, all over the world, man. Ship all over the world every day.
Right. That's the next order. Done.
Yeah, dude. Sweet.
Thank you so much for your time, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Have a good time.